Buenas, seguimos aquí para el taller de la relación de alma gemela. Este es el segundo vídeo y con Claudia y Ana C. desde Venezuela también se nos ha unido. ¿Qué tal, Claudia? ¿Sigues con el calor? ¿El calor va creciendo?
Sí, gracias, Iván. Hola, Ana, bienvenida. Bueno, la verdad es que revela así un poco como el alma todo lo domina. Revela nuestra condición, Iván. Tristemente, sí,
Sí, el
estamos
calor y los incendios.
padeciendo.
Y bueno, y Ana, ¿qué
Ujú.
dices ahí desde Venezuela? ¿Cómo?
Mira, hoy hay amaneció como 18 grados, ya debe estar 20, bien fresco, y por las tardes un poquito de calor, pero bien, bien. El clima está
Fantástico.
loco para mí, porque en esta época había más calor que frío.
Sí.
Gracias, Iván. Hola.
Gracias. Pues bueno, pues vamos a seguir. Estamos en este punto, ya verás que son cosas que medio te sabes, medio no, pero hay preguntas muy interesantes. Ana, tú que vienes en esta segunda hora y vamos por aquí. Entonces,
Voy.
That one all blew you away, so that's Robert, you were this one down here. Thanks, lady.
Just a quick jump back to the body parts. I was at a funeral yesterday and the elderly man had donated all in his entire body.
Mm-hmm.
I was just thinking of the implications of that.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking at the funeral, is it loving? Is it loving or not loving? I mean, in the natural world, it's loving to give you, the thought of it is loving to give your body parts away. But in actual fact, I now see that it could not be loving to yourself, given that your spirit could end up with that body, staying with that person and that body part.
Well, the only way that your spirit would end up staying with a person who has your body part is for you to have an emotional connection to your physical body still. And obviously, if you were progressing on the divine love path, that wouldn't happen. And the only time that you would have to consider whether it's unloving or not is that the person whose body part your part is going into so let's say they have a bad kidney or something and your kidney is going into them. There is a certain law of attraction that's created that particular injury in them before your body part was available to them. And by giving them a kidney, there is this possibility, if you think about it, that you're actually reversing some of that law of attraction to stop them from looking at the emotion. So there is an emotional creation of every single thing that goes wrong with it. And if there's an emotional creation and I then fix the effect of that creation, then when is the cause addressed? Now, I'm perfectly happy with a person giving all of their body parts away, but I'm also saying that the people who have those body parts given to them need to start addressing the emotional reasons why that body part failed for them. Does that make sense? And there's always going to be a cause as to why that failed. Yeah. So that's the only ethical thing you would have to deal with that, but that's a bit off topic. So we'll go back to the soulmate topic, please. We'll go to Pete next.
Actually, Young had that experience that
Alex
has had with a man I was in a relationship with some years ago,
Yep.
quite a lot of times, or 4 times or something, and it was just amazing. Like, we just felt so at one. I mean, it wasn't during sex or anything.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm pretty sure he wasn't my soulmate. Is that still possible with...
Yes, it is still possible,
yeah.
and I'll talk about why. The reason why is that often spirits are attracted to us under certain conditions who themselves want to have a relationship in the spirit world.
Aquí añadido también espíritus que están atraídos a nosotros en una cierta condición y ahora dice, y que quieren una relación entre ellos, entre esos espíritus quieren una relación entre sí en el mundo espiritual. Vale, está aquí, sí.
And what they do is they use our relationship to consummate their relationship. Right? We were up at Mackay recently, and a lady came up to us and talked to us about this happening to her, and it's happened to many, many people, of course. And do you understand what I mean by this?
Vamos a ver el dibujo un momento, sin parar nada ni nada. Está más para acá.
I could have an emotion as a male that I'm a bit overbearing, a bit controlling. I view women sort of, I'm sort of like a bit of a power freak with women, let's say, and so forth. And that's going to attract a man who is in the same condition in the spirit world, who's earthbound, to connect with me, to use me to connect with women who he wants to treat the same way. Does that make sense? And there could be a woman on the other end, connected to another lady on earth, who has a feeling of, she wants to be dominated a bit by men, wants to be like secure, feel secure, that's her hook, but she might feel like she gets sexually turned on when the man's a bit dominant, you know what I mean? And so the two of them can connect with each other, and now these two may meet up in the spirit world, and because they're in different locations in spirit, usually in the first sphere in different locations, they use the people to connect with each other sexually and emotionally.
Tenemos entonces el hombre que solo tiene un espíritu, está dibujado con un solo cuerpo aquí, y la persona que tenemos cuerpo físico y espiritual, dibujados esos dos cuerpos en la mitad masculina, y lo mismo aquí, el espíritu femenino con su propia alma, que no está dibujada aquí, influyendo sobre otra mujer en la tierra, y estos dos para tener su relación. Y esto es lo que en otra llamada, quizás en otro directo, podemos comentarlo en mi caso concreto, que ya lo comentaremos después, cuando termine esta hora, de qué va un poco, que me pasó con muchas luces y muchas historias, y la creencia en la reencarnación también influye, o sea, es muy fuerte. Entonces lo vemos. Así, usan a la gente y vamos por aquí, seguimos.
So it may not be a sexual connection, it may be an emotional connection. And what often can occur then is this person gives to this person the same kind of feeling as what Alex was describing. Does that make sense? And this person gives to this person the same kind of feeling. And so now they think, we must be together, we're meant to be together and everything. And then 3 months later, they realise that actually they're not meant to be together. And it all happened. And this lady, after a while, understood what was happening. And she could feel the spirit with her. And the spirit that was with her doing it was a woman spirit who had been imprisoned, interned in a camp in the Second World War. In an Italian prison camp, I think it was, in the Second World War. And the man who she was connecting to through the partner was the man who actually was a guard who had sex with her when she was in prison in the war. And they entered this sort of abusive relationship, which they then used people on earth to carry out.
O sea, entran en esa especie de relación abusiva en la Segunda Guerra Mundial y luego utilizan, después de esos años ya muertos los dos, personas de la Tierra para realizarla, por así decir, para llevar a cabo de nuevo esa misma relación sexual.
Even though that experience felt so loving and positive, it didn't feel like.
The truth is, you can connect emotionally to any person on the planet. Right? And so that doesn't mean that they're soulmates necessarily, does it? The key with the soulmate connection is that it's going to be a sexual connection as well as an emotional connection, as well as many other connections will occur as well. And you will know the difference between the two when you feel it. But how do you know he wasn't your soulmate?
Well, he's left him with another woman.
So,
He's not my soulmate, is he?
why don't you feel he's your soulmate, Marisa? Because he's with another woman?
I had some judgment about him.
Okay, let's talk about the judgment. What was the judgment you had? It's all right to be
He was a bit goofy and he wasn't my ideal idea of a man.
Yes, and this is the stuff I want to talk to you about.
And there was some dark stuff in his childhood. I felt quite uncomfortable with.
You felt repulsed.
Repulsed, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Can you see why I want to talk to you about all that? Because he could have been your soulmate.
He could have been.
And you rejected your soulmate because your judgment of goofiness and your judgment of childhood issues and your judgment. It's quite that simple to reject your soulmate. So every rejection of our soulmate is based upon emotional injuries. And if you think about it, what you're relating is a lot of emotional injury-based reasons as to why you rejected somebody. So yeah, he could have been your soulmate. And this is also the truth, that many of you have met your soulmates, but you just didn't know it at the time, right? Because you didn't want to know it at the time, because it wasn't your ideal version of your soulmate. Does that make sense? And this is something we need to really address, emotionally address. And this is why I want to get into the emotional discussion after I've discussed the technicals, is because if we do not address those issues, you can be brought face to face with your soulmate and not know, right? And walk away from them and think someone totally different is your soulmate because you don't want to address the emotional issues inside of yourself as the reason why you rejected them. So this is why it's so important to deal with the emotions, right? Because yes, some people's soulmates appear goofy, right? And some people's soulmates don't appear very intelligent at all. And some people's soulmates feel actually are just downright nasty. Because every single person on the planet has one. Has a soulmate, I mean. So, you know, are there nasty people on Earth? Yes. So one of them might be your soulmate. You know? Can you see how if we judge things through sort of the physical and also through our preconceptions usually about ideas with relation to parents, then what happens is we often reject our own soulmate in the process. This is why it's very important to work through these issues. Does that make sense? It's a good question. Good question. Now, so the two of us have incarnated. We're now on the planet somewhere, and barring any injury, in other words, you know, someone passed because they got run over by a truck or whatever, we're still here on the planet probably somewhere, right? So, how do we find them? from a technical point of view. What you do is you look through the phone book and you it's not like that at all, right? Trust me, I have tried some really. What you do is you look through the phone book and it's not like that at all, right? Trust me, I have tried some really maniacal ways of finding that. By the way, looking through my phone book wasn't one of them, but and I just want to state that categorically. But because I've longed for my soulmate most of my life, I've had this like feeling of missing her most of my life. And so I've done some very strange things, right? Looking for my soulmate. Until I gave up the look. I needed to give up the looking. And the reason why I was looking was because I was unwilling to deal with my grief associated with the issue. Does everyone follow that? I was looking so that I could avoid a heap of grief. And once I realized that, and I just stopped looking and started focusing on feeling my grief, right? Once I started focusing on really feeling the grief I felt, then I could start feeling my soulmate and her characteristics and her personality again and all of those other things I started to feel. It wasn't until then. Before then, what I was doing lots of different things, and I think the air conditioners need to go back on again if we can do that. And I was doing lots of different things to try and find my soulmate. So I mentioned it. Might as well give everyone a bit more fodder for the internet. Well, one of the things I did was I just thought my soulmate's somewhere in the Sunshine Coast, right? And so what I did was I did a drive-by of the Sunshine Coast. Trying to trust my feelings, right? So I was going up, trusting my feelings, and then I was getting up near Gympie, and I'm going, whoa. And so I was really, no, this is very good. I was like, and ironically, my soulmate's parents lived in Gympie, but I didn't know it at the time.
Supongo que Gympie debe ser una zona muy bonita y por eso la gente se ha reído, porque ha dicho, wow, que aquí tiene que ser, pero irónicamente lo que dice ahí.
And so I was driving up, and then I saw Mary River, right? And then I started really, and then all of a sudden I had huge amounts of emotions. So I had to pull over the side of the road and have to cry, actually. And so I thought something about up here. But that very night in mind, I thought, no, she'd like the beach. This is my intellectual thing going, you know? And lo and behold, Mary does love the beach. But anyway, and she'd like the beach. She must be down somewhere along the coast. I'd drive along the coast, you know, the coast road, you know, from Malulabar right up to whatever. Oh, I get a bit of a hook into Coolum Beach, you know, so I stayed there for 5 days. These are crazy things that I've done. Like, stayed there for 5 days. Did I find her? Guess where she was at the time? In Lebanon. Like, how am I going to find her there? Like, anyway. So, yeah, impossible for me to do that. So all I was doing really was just avoiding some stuff. And once I started focusing on what I was avoiding, I could understand why I was avoiding it, because there was lots of grief and I had to feel lots of grief. And one of the things I learned was that if actually you hold on to your grief and you're looking for your soulmate in order to avoid a heap of grief, you're not going to find a soulmate under those conditions, right? Because you need to feel this grief and release it before your soulmate will join you. Otherwise, what's happening? Your soulmate's got this job, right, to cheer you up. That feels very attractive to you, like to have a job before they even met you, like that you're going to have to be cheered up by them. It doesn't feel very attractive, does it? So So you want to release those emotions. And anyway, it took me a lot of my life to realize all of these things. And so sometimes what I would do is I'd get to a group like this and I'd say, do any of you think that you might know my soulmate? 20 people would put up their hands and have 20 different answers, right? And then, of course, sometimes a medium would come along and say, oh, your soulmate's this person. So, you know me, like I'd go up and find out. So if that person was like somewhere overseas, I'd go over there and check it out. And of course, that didn't work very well either. Because I'd meet them and go, no, this person's not my soulmate at all. So there we go. And in the end, I gave up all of that. I gave up all of that searching and all of that and just concentrate on feeling my grief. And when I started concentrating on feeling my grief, I could feel my soulmate. And I could even feel, ironically, that she was overseas at the time. So I could feel that. I didn't know where overseas. I could just feel she wasn't in Australia once I started allowing myself to feel. And then I could feel, actually, there was one time that I felt very distressed about my soulmate. And I actually went back to Coolum Beach of all places and hired another week of a what do you call it, apartment, and spent the whole week crying in the apartment. Not a very good use of a Coolum Beach apartment, by the way. The beach is a far better location. But what I'm saying is that I just spent the whole week there because I was in so much turmoil emotionally, because I could feel that my soulmate was in turmoil. And I felt that the decisions she was making that week somehow related to our lives together. And we found out afterwards that the decision she was making was she was thinking of marrying somebody overseas. Yeah. And I felt the turmoil of that. And then by the end of the week, I realized that it was all over. And the irony was, by the end of the week, she was coming home to Australia. So things change quite rapidly when you feel things. You know? We have the mic down here. Sorry, Lee.
So if I've understood this discussion correctly, you feeling that grief in Coolum may have affected Mary's decision not to go ahead with that marriage.
Totally. The thing you need to understand, and we'll talk about this more and more, the thing you need to understand is that every single emotion you feel and release inside of yourself, your soulmate will have an effect. It will have an effect on them. Right? So it's very, very powerful emotionally. Yeah.
Actually, that was a little bit along the lines of my question. Mm-hmm. Given that more people are finding out about the divine love path, and that there is that strong magnetic attraction between the two halves, is the likelihood for the people in the room here, myself included, that as we continue to work with our emotions, our soulmate will actually discover and find the divine love path also. Yep. Since we've got that tendency to have similar interests.
Yep. It's likely, but it's not necessarily true. You see, a lot of times what we have is a lot of judgments about people. And to be frank with you, many of you have judgments about people that are not on the divine love path, right? Can you feel those judgments? Some of you have them, right? And so what happens is that oftentimes our soulmate might not be on the divine love path until we work through those judgments. You follow me? Until we actually work our way through a lot of those emotions that cause us to think, oh, the person I'm with can't be my soulmate because they're not attracted to the divine love path. That is a judgment, and that is not necessarily true. They might be your soulmate, and it's just that you're in a place of judgment about the divine love path. Does that make sense? When you work your way through the divine love path emotionally, you'll get to a point where you no longer judge anybody who's not on the path as well, including your potential soulmate. All right, so be very, very careful of these trying to preempt, oh, I'm on the path, so my soulmate must be on the path, that kind of thing. Like, I'm a musician, so my soulmate must be a musician. It's the same thing. I'm you know, whatever. I'm a builder, so my soulmate's got to be one. You know, when you start thinking about some of the places we could take it to pretty weird places, couldn't we, right? And so in the end, what we need to do is realize that everything that I have within me that's a judgment of something outside of me, it's going to prevent me from being open to my soulmate anyway. So it's so important to work on yourself in this discussion. Jen?
So in fact, when I met Graham, it wasn't until we started to release lots of our individual, you know, like our unique emotional injuries, that I've actually come to the realization of just how similar we are.
Yeah.
But that wasn't my question. My question is about prayer.
Yeah.
So what is appropriate prayer in regarding to our soulmate, in that the way in which we pray perhaps can come from our soul injuries?
So, please send me my soulmate. Please send me my soulmate. I don't know if that's going to have much effect. What do you reckon?
Yeah.
Right. So.
So then the question is, after that,
yeah.
Praying for your soulmate then would affect the other half?
Praying for anybody else affects them. So you can pray for them, but you've got to look at what's your motive. Remember, when it comes to prayer, our motive must be pure. And if I have a motive that I want my, please, you know, praying for my soulmate every night because my motive is I want to meet her, then how pure is this motive? No, it's not that pure, really, is it? It's quite selfish. So when we pray for anybody, we don't want to pray for them from a selfish place. We want to pray for them from the place of love, which is a very different place. So just bear that in mind when you're praying for soulmate. You know, screaming to God at the top of your lungs, please give me my soulmate now, is not probably going to arrive, you know, anytime shortly. And pleading with God to send you your soulmate because you can't bear your life as it is definitely not going to result in you receiving the soulmate shortly. Because you need to deal with the emotional injuries we have. And when we deal with the emotional injuries truthfully, that automatically attracts the soul, the other half of the soul. Does that make sense? Like there's an automatic attraction that occurs as a result of that. So, you come down here and then up to there.
Hi. I've got a couple of questions. If you're selfish, which I am.
Aquí dice, si eres egoísta, lo cual yo soy.
And I am too.
Y ahí dice Jesús, yo también lo soy.
Yeah, I mean,
sí, bueno.
How can you get out of this from a selfish point of view? And what about just desiring your soulmate?
Y ahí es cuando ya viene la transcripción.
How selfish is that?
Yeah, this is a very good point, and I want to raise this in the whole discussion about the law of desire, because most people think desire is selfish.
No, I don't think it is,
no?
Because if that's what our soul is, our desires and emotions, then how can it be selfish?
It's not. So let's define selfishness. Selfishness is when I want somebody else to help me suppress one of my emotions.
I do a good enough job of that by myself.
Okay. But can you see my definition of selfishness? I want somebody else to help me suppress one of my own emotions. Now, when I'm going, please give me my soulmate because I'm lonely, what am I saying? I'm wanting my soulmate to help me suppress the emotion of loneliness that's inside of my soul. So is that a selfish motive? Yes. So even though I think I'm desirous in that state of not being lonely, it's actually an avoidance of one of my own emotions, and therefore it's a selfish condition. Now, those kind of selfish acts won't be.
O sea, aunque él crea que está deseando en ese estado de estar solo y de estar deseando no estarlo, en realidad es una evitación. Estamos en ese estado de, ay, no quiero estar solo. Sí, porque ahí habría que, aunque está bien y se entiende, pero habría que matizar un poco el este. Bueno, ese tipo de actos
by God, and also don't, obviously are very harmful if you got satisfied in that state.
O sea, si uno se viera satisfecho, el deseo ahí, en ese estado, sería muy perjudicial. Si uno se encontrara con el deseo satisfecho, si se cumpliera su deseo, como lo diríamos, sería muy perjudicial. Cosa que Dios, como vemos ahí, no lo escucha, no lo hace, pero sí pueden hacerlo espíritus, otras personas, etcétera, como luego comentaremos.
Because what would happen is your soulmate would come along and you'd no longer feel lonely, but there's all this loneliness still within you. Does that make sense? You're never going to become at one with God now because you're ignoring all this loneliness within you. And obviously the loneliness will attract an event to trigger it, which may even involve your soulmate. Right? So what if your soulmate passes and then you're back to being lonely again? Does that make sense?
The question that I have a couple around this, if you think you know who your soulmate is, and like I tested, can you...
Aquí dice, si creo, o sea, si crees que sabes cuál es tu alma gemela, y dice, y lo he comprobado, quién era.
Physiology as to who I believed it was, does that mean it is?
I had a whole discussion, I don't know if it's actually on the net, but I had a whole discussion about...
Dice que no sabe si está en la red, pero tuvo toda esta conversación sobre ello, sobre
kinesiology and the influences that are available on you when you're performing kinesiology. And there are quite a lot of external influence upon you when you're doing kinesiology, because you've got your own emotional state, you've got the state of any spirit with you, which can influence your emotional state. You've got also the state of the tester, whoever is testing it. If it's you, then there's even more influence on the state. Does that make sense? So there are actually lots of things involved with kinesiology that, while kinesiology can be used as a tool to determine truth, if you come to depend on it when you're in an emotional condition that's not yet at one with God, you'll find that there will be some errors in the testing. So what I'm saying as a result is that while it's an interesting thing that you tested it and it came out to be true, it may not in the end be true. And so in the end, you've still got to deal with the emotional reason why you wanted to test it. Does that make sense? And this is where a lot of people with things like kinesiology and these tools, even the tool of mediumship, right? The tool of mediumship is a tool that allows the spirit to communicate to you and tell you all sorts of information. If you want to use it to avoid an emotion, you can. And many of us who are trying to test for our soulmate or test for other things are just in that process of avoiding an emotion. Does that make sense? Avoiding an emotion that I don't really believe it to be true. Oh, yeah, it is true. Oh, I've got to accept it then. But there's still an emotion inside that says, I don't believe it to be true, sitting in there that needs to come out. Does that make sense?
For me, it made perfect sense. Absolutely perfect sense.
Yep. Which of course it would do if you tested it to be true.
Yeah.
Okay.
Creo que está jugando con las... Están haciéndolo más complejo. Por supuesto que tendría sentido si se probara que es verdad. Lo que está diciendo ahora es como si hiciera kinesiología sobre lo que acaba de decir Jesús, de que en realidad ella estaba intentando evitar la emoción, de que no cree que es cierto. Creo que es por eso que se ríen o que hay esa picardía ahí con el tema. Por supuesto que lo tendría, tiene todo el sentido del mundo. Sí, si se probara, y creo que está haciendo como una medio broma con ese tema de complejizarlo también, no lo sé. Pero es tampoco igual, vamos para allá.
I wish you would just tell us all the name of our soulmate, where they are,
Exactly.
where we're going to be with them,
Now we're getting to the
what our current partners will be doing. Will they be happy when we go with our soulmate?
So what was the first one? The name. You wanted the name. What was the next one? The timing. You wanted the timing. What was the next one? Yeah, well, let's might as well go for the whole lot while we're at it, right? And can you see that in doing that, we're often avoiding living in truth in our current situation? You see what happens a lot of the times is that many of you, for example, know for certain you're not with your soulmate, right? But what do you finish up doing? Stay with the person you're with until you meet your soulmate. That's what you think, right? You're going to have to confront it a lot more than that. If you know the person you're with is not your soulmate, then how can you remain with them if the soulmate part of your side is open? The soulmate part of your soul is open. You won't be able to remain with them. So that's telling me that your soulmate part of your soul is not open. It's close. There's no might after a while. You know whether the person you're with is not or is. And if you know they're not, then why are you still with them? You're only still with them because of security and other issues, right? Worry about finances, worry about children, worry about all emotional issues which need to be addressed. So address them. Does that make sense? Don't run away from them. We'll talk about this more in the second half of our discussion because it's so important to understand. So please understand that I'm not telling you you've got to all just leave your partners and be single, right? So I'm not saying that, and anybody on the internet that says that I'm not saying.
Y cualquier persona en internet que diga eso, no lo estoy diciendo porque ha sido una de las cosas por la que le han difamado era por eso, ¿no? De querer romper parejas y todo. Por eso ahí hace eso y no lo ponen en la transcripción.
But what I am saying that you do need to address the emotional reasons inside of yourself as to why the soulmate part of your soul is not open. And there will be lots of reasons which we shall discuss that cause that to be closed. We can go over here and then over to Mary.
AJ, it's been interesting listening, but it sounds like everybody thinks that when they meet their soulmate, it's going to be perfect happiness and bliss.
Yeah,
And I don't think people realise just how difficult it is going to be.
No.
I think there's an erroneous idea there that if I meet my soulmate, everything becomes one and easier. And I know for me personally, that is not true.
Or, yeah, when you think about it, if it takes to the 22nd sphere to become at one with your soulmate, don't you think that there's going to be quite a lot to deal with? So, if you can become at one with God by the 8th sphere, and it takes another 14 to become at one with your soulmate, don't you think there's going to be a fair bit to deal with? Yeah. So all of us that have this utopian viewpoint of meet your soulmate, happy ever after, really we've got rocks in our heads, right? Because that's not true. That's not how it's going to happen at all. You're right. It's not how it's going to happen at all. Our soulmate is going to be our perfect sympathetic, like our perfect partner, but only once we work through lots of not only issues of emotional injury, because remember our emotional injuries by the time we hit the 8th sphere are gone. So what does that tell me? I become at one with my soulmate way up here, the 22nd. By the time I get to the 8th sphere, my emotional injuries are gone. So what am I learning here? There's obviously got to be lots of...
Aquí se ha estado señalando, como habéis visto, hacia arriba de la 8.
Truths between the soulmate's halves that I've still got to absorb. You see that? And they won't be emotional injuries. They'll actually be other things. Truths that you will absorb as you grow closer to God that will pull you together with into your soulmate, right? So the truth is that there is going to be lots of stuff confronted not just emotional injuries. Obviously, confronting emotional injuries from the seventh sphere down, including the seventh sphere, is very difficult task, and that's the task that we don't enjoy very much, right? So, you know, seventh, up and progress from there to the top of the seventh sphere is some of the hardest progress you'll make. The reason why it's hard is because there's all this error-based painful feelings to release that are stored within your soul. Does that make sense? So it's going to be quite difficult. But once you make the transition into a one with God, at this point you're at one with God, right, in the eighth sphere, then obviously from then on you're just learning, that having the pleasure of, I should say, learning new truths. But doesn't that tell you there's quite a lot of truth that is going to have to be learned too? You'll enjoy it then. That's the beauty of it. And if both of you hit the one-month stage, obviously your joy in relationship is going to be quite intense, right? As you're progressing through those things, because there's no longer emotional injuries or emotional baggage to influence the relationship between yourself and your soulmate. But there is still lots to learn that will keep you away from being at one with each other until you learn it. Does that make sense? So yeah, forget about the whole ideal partner type thing in terms of an injury-based viewpoint of it, because it's actually quite a lot of error in that. And by the way, there's quite a lot of expectation in that, right? That this person will meet. Basically what you're saying is this person's going to meet all of my emotional injuries perfectly. Is that what you want? Because if that's what you want, then I'd suggest you don't follow the divine love path at all and go and find another path that happens on, right? Because on the divine love path, what happens is we are concerned about getting into and releasing all of our emotional injuries so that we don't have any injuries. That's why that's the whole path, right? And as we progress on that path, they're not interested in finding a person that meets all of my injuries. We're now interested in finding a person who has integrity, character, truth, and all these other things, of course, that will allow us to grow and then to continue growing. And if they're our soulmate, we'll just keep growing together. Yep. Mary, you wanted to say?
Oh, darling, I was just trying to quietly tell you it was 2:30.
2:30, is it? Oh, okay.
Ahora dice que solo le estaba intentando decir que ya son las 2:30, pero sí que va a decir algo más.
So I've got a half an hour before.
Can I say, though, that I think that there's something that happens when soulmates meet. Because the law of attraction is so intense, it actually triggers your emotional injuries even more. Yeah.
So when you first meet your soulmate, you will often have intense negative emotional events occur. And when I say intensely negative, you think it's intense now, you wait till you meet your soulmate, it gets intense then. Right? Because if you're...
Aquí en el sentido ese, ¿no? Pues espera.
Putting together emotionally, and there's all these emotional injuries, things get triggered quite a lot. And if Mary's okay with it, I'll talk about some of the things that got triggered between us. In the later half of the talk. Yeah. Linda?
I had an experience some time ago where I released some grief, and I was sitting on the end of my bed and just fairly relaxed and looking in the mirror and thinking about who my soulmate might be. And I saw half of my face, his face, and the other half of mine.
Mm-hmm.
And could that be spirit influence or like still emotional injuries? Or like I do know this person, but so I saw that half and I was like,
okay, let's address this issue. Anytime you have a metaphysical interaction, there is always the danger of there being a spirit involved. So any single time you're looking for any metaphysical confirmation of your soulmate, including mediumship, kinesiology, visions, images, dreams, and so forth, there always could be a spirit involved in this process who is actually not your soulmate, right? And who doesn't want to point out your soulmate. The only way you're going to find out is as you grow in love, in divine love. That's the only way you're going to find out in the end, really, isn't it? Now, in the spirit world, it's a little easier to find out than it is here. Because in the spirit world, even on the natural love path, by the time you get to the 5th sphere of the spirit world, you start noticing this unique energetic connection that seems to go off into the distance to somebody at the other end, if you haven't recognized it before. And it's a unique connection. It's like, oh, remember in the spirit world I've been telling you, every connection has colors. Whatever emotion is that I'm feeling has all colors associated with it. So there's this unique color that connects you between you and the soulmate, right? And that unique color you start noticing coming out of you and going somewhere. And so all you need to do to find your soulmate is to trace the color, right? And that'll lead you to a person that you'll look at and go, like, I've got no idea why I've got this connection to that person, and walk off. That's what most of them do initially, right? Because they haven't had a soulmate longing before them, and they're just noticing the colour, right? And so when you have a soulmate longing, it draws you straight away. But when you are just noticing the metaphysical, it draws you to the person. You examine the person, you go, I don't know why I'm interested. Why there's this connection between us. I'll find out at some point later, and off you go doing something else. Right? And this is a problem with all metaphysical type manifestations, is there can always be some kind of spirit transaction involved. My suggestion is to deal with the emotions. And this is why we want to have the second half of this discussion of what kind of emotions cause the soulmate half of your soul to open. And then notice what happens when you start opening that part of your soul. Because you opening that part of your soul will draw your soulmate to you, right? So in other words, it's not going to be someone necessarily that you think you should have. It's going to be something that is drawn to you because your part of the soul is open. This is why it's so important to focus on your emotional injuries regarding the opposite gender, or if you have a same-sex attraction to the same gender. You need to deal with those emotional injuries. Does that make sense? So any metaphysical thing, always look upon with suspicion. I've had 5 different mediums tell me 5 different songs. And none of it got it right, by the way.
Yeah, I wasn't thinking about it at the time, I don't think. Like I was just...
But you were thinking about
who is my
soulmate.
Then it just kind
you
of,
were sitting down and concentrating, looking in the mirror, thinking, who is my soulmate? I
don't know, I was just looking in the mirror because that's right near my bed, and then it just kind of changed. It actually freaked me out because I was like, no, I didn't want to see that, but then it was a bit of a...
Okay.
So, yeah, I did.
But can you see how that could draw a spirit into the mix?
Yeah.
Just you feeling about the issue straight away draws anybody who into the mix.
Yeah.
And that person can easily give you a vision. And before you know it, so I'm not saying don't trust it. What I'm saying is, okay, that happened. Let yourself know that happened. But now feel about it. Emotionally feel about it. So what's the emotions there about? Because it's someone in your past, isn't it?
Yeah, an ex, but he kind of moved on. And
okay. So what's that telling you? There's still quite a lot of emotions with this ex that you need to address. I would address them. Go ahead and address them.
There's a lot of stuff just happening all the time.
Yeah. Don't avoid those emotions. Address them. Yeah. What if this person is your soulmate? Address that. How are you
I don't really like him.
Okay. So feel about that. Let yourself feel it. Yeah. So let yourself feel about that. And let yourself go through the emotional experience of that. So understand that all of these metaphysical experiences, whether they are agreement of whether they are true about a soulmate or untrue,
Verdaderas o falsas respecto al alma gemela, se refiere, ahí lo dice.
are all law of attraction events that we need to work through an emotion about. Does that make sense? So when one of the mediums told me that my soulmate was somebody overseas, and I go over there as a part of a trip, and I decide to call in, and I meet the person, and they're not my soulmate, and I can feel that. What do I feel? Well, there was a feeling of somebody telling me an untruth, you know, like a spirit telling me an untruth. I can't trust spirits. There was a feeling of, you know what I mean? There was quite a few feelings associated with that. You know, disappointment that, I thought I was going to meet my soulmate, but I didn't. You know, there's all sorts of different emotions involved in a process like that. So let yourself feel them. They are all things that need to be healed and released. Okay. If we go, I don't think you've asked the question. You have? Oh, you have. So let's start with Natalie and work our way back.
Would a celestial spirit tell you who your soulmate is?
Not always, no. In fact, most celestial spirits will try to help you deal with the emotional reason why you can't work it out for yourself. What does a celestial spirit want you to do? The celestial spirit wants you to work through all of your own blockages towards God. Once all of those blockages are released and you become closer and closer to God, you will come closer and closer to yourself. You'll become a lot more self-reliant, and you'll know in yourself when you meet your soulmate.
O sea, cuando la conozcas, sin acento aquí, lo reconocerás por ti misma, en ti misma.
That's what a celestial spirit wants you to do. So is a celestial, when you say, who's my soulmate? The celestial spirit says Mary. Like, is that a celestial spirit? Do you think maybe?
Well, I was doing some channeling about myself.
Mm-hmm.
I had a feeling that my husband was my soulmate.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted it confirmed.
Right.
And I believed I was talking to my spirit guides at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, yes, but you already knew this.
Mm-hmm.
So
Did you?
Yeah.
So why did you ask?
I want to be sure.
Why?
Because I had doubt.
No. See, doubt's a good excuse to get away from other emotions. What are the real emotions?
Well, I asked why I doubted, and they said it was because I didn't feel that I deserved that kind of love from a person, and that I had longed for it for a long time,
Yeah.
and I didn't feel that was deserved. So,
Can you see though that with your relationship with your husband, you are, not allowing yourself to be open, not allowing yourself to be vulnerable, not allowing yourself to actually connect? Can you see that? Like, can you see the previous injuries from previous relationships have caused you to block off to the male? Can you see that? So the question really that I would ask you is, you're in a relationship, you're married, in a relationship, why aren't you opening to this man? Because your question is actually about avoiding that emotion. Can you see the relationship?
Yeah.
You're avoiding the emotions of opening up to the man because you think maybe he's not my soulmate. If you think maybe he's not my soulmate, why are you with him? You need to allow yourself to open up to this man and discover the process of whether he is your soulmate or not. Does that make sense? You're in a relationship. Your law of attraction has brought you this relationship, right? And you thought that he might be your soulmate. So why aren't you opening to him?
I have no idea.
Yeah, that's the crux of the issue. Can you see? That's the emotion you need to go for. What emotionally is causing you to not be open to this man?
So then in that case, if I was to ask for someone on someone else's behalf, if I was channeling and I was to ask about someone else's soulmate, I would not necessarily receive the correct information.
No, that's right. Yeah. And this is the trouble, is that it's our own emotional injuries that affect all communication with the spirit world until we're at one with God. Right? So you will actually be able to get things wrong even as a medium and still get things wrong, even though you're convinced that they weren't wrong. Because a lot of our conviction comes from emotional injuries about a certain set of circumstances or events. In your case here, what's happening is you're avoiding total openness and vulnerability towards your partner, right? So if you suspected he was your soulmate up till now, why haven't you just gone for it? There's got to be a reason.
I don't understand what you mean when you say
Why haven't you just gone for total openness and total vulnerability and total honesty and total everything with this partner?
I've just tried doing some of that this week.
Okay, that's good. And that's what you need to let yourself do. Because when you do that, you'll quickly find whether the person's your partner or your soulmate or not. And you won't need to then ask the question. You see, most of our questions are governed by emotional injuries. Can you see that? Fears, anger even, sadness, grief, shame. A lot of our questions are all based around those injuries. If we allow ourselves to even examine what kind of question we're asking and go deeper into it, we'll often find the answer is not related to the thing we thought it was, but rather an emotional injury that blocks me to doing something in my own development. So often we ask the question, is this person my soulmate? Because we want to avoid having an open, honest and truthful relationship with this person until we know. Can you see that? Right? You either know or you don't know. If you don't know why you're with them, if you do know, if you don't know, you might decide, I'm going to be with them for security, or I'm going to be with them for, whatever issues that we might have. Why do you decide to stay in a relationship for security? Can you see that's a compromise? Can you see that? So allow yourself to investigate this. Okay, you had a question? Can we go for a mic there? One around here somewhere? Just behind you.
Hello. My question is, at the time of God's creation of a soul, male and female, masculine and feminine together, that entity, as created by God, has free will.
The single entity, yeah.
Yes. Okay. So at that point of having, one could say almost divine free will, or pure free will, where we're acting together without emotional injuries, because of that, at the point of creation.
Can I say, though, that it's not conscious that it has free will?
All right. And yet
it has free will, but it doesn't know how to express it.
Yeah. So before you mentioned that there is personality or individuality at the time of creation.
The two are different.
All right.
Personality is something that God imbues into the soul.
Yes.
Which we can also develop further. But individualization can only happen through
at the split,
through the incarnation process.
Yes. All right. So if the soul is relatively free of emotional injuries at the time that it's complete.
Yes, before incarnation, it is completely free.
Yes. And so why would the soul at that point not just praise and glorify the Father?
Because it hasn't come to become aware of itself yet. So it can't even know to do that.
I see. But it does have free will at that point. In order to exercise free will.
But to exercise free will, you have to become an individual. You have to actually know that you've got it. You see, when we were created as souls in this original pristine state, we were not aware that we had free will, even though we had it. and we were not aware of our own, we didn't have any awareness of even ourselves, even though at some point in the future we would become aware of ourselves. So in this state, you could think of it like a soul with personality and a single entity, but without any self-awareness. And it's the process of incarnation that creates the self-awareness. Unfortunately, it's also the process of incarnation onto the planet at the moment in its current condition that creates all of our emotional injuries.
Yes. And degrades awareness.
And degrades awareness,
Yes.
to a degree.
Yeah.
But we become aware that we are an individual. So the process of individualization is completed by our incarnation.
Right.
But unfortunately, our own self-awareness of a lot of other issues often gets harmed because of the emotional injuries. The way God created this part of it, this part down, the earth, if you like, is that God created this to actually, in sometime in the future, this will be the case, where people will incarnate onto the earth in complete awareness, in the sense that everyone on earth will not be preventing awareness. So these little baby souls, if you could think of them that way, will come to the earth. They still won't have any experience because it's our life that creates experience, but they will begin to have awareness at a much, much younger age.
Yes, so the level of emotional injury will diminish quite dramatically in that period.
Yes, and that'll diminish by us dealing with our emotional injuries.
Yes.
Which means that when we come together and get pregnant, our child will have far less injuries, so therefore more awareness and more rapid awareness of development.
Yes.
Yep.
So humanity will be at that point freer and closer to the divine.
Yeah, it'll be, let's use the term evolve.
Yes.
Quite rapidly.
Yeah.
So this is why this period of time, and from a metaphysical perspective, and all of you have heard these things, all of you are interested in channeling and whatever, have heard all of this, like this is the time of change. This is the time where the whole planet's going to go through this huge change and all that kind of stuff. How it's going to go through this change is by groups of people like yourself getting into a state where you're releasing your emotional injuries, so that those emotional injuries, the next generation of people that incarnate will have less injuries. And as a result of those less injuries, have more awareness of all of these different things that we're now talking about in our 30s, 40s or 50s, they'll be talking about when they're 10 or 5 at school, right? And then the next generation after that, we won't even need to talk about it, because by the time they're 5, they'll be doing it, right? So they won't even need to talk about it, let alone, try to practice it. So many of us at the moment are developing our mediumship skills or developing our other skills, right? Well, once all this change occurs, a 5-year-old, they'll say, you had to develop your, what do you mean develop? Like, they'll look at all this material that AJ did, mediumship session 1, mediumship and healing session 2, and they go, why did you do all of that for? Like, because they will have those things automatically occurring because of the emotions that have been released generationally. Those things will just be automatically present. So the problem that we face today is that because of the huge suppression of emotion on the planet and the huge emotional baggage on the planet, we have actually basically controlled and suppressed our own development as a human race as a result. And as we release these emotional injuries, the process of evolving will become much more rapid. And because of it speeding up much more rapid, things that we learn to do in our own lifetime, a 5-year-old would be able to do in the next 2 generations. And we'll be going, boy, I don't know whether I wanted to be born in that generation. It would be lovely to be born into a generation where you're 5 and doing a lot of these things that we're now 50 and we still don't know what to do. And so, when you allow that to see the truth of that, you can see the potential of the human race. Yeah.
Thanks, AJ.
No worries. Back to James, and then up the back to Brian.
The soul at creation and prior to incarnation, does it have awareness of God?
No. It does have a sense of being, that, but because it's not conscious of itself, it's not aware of its surroundings. So while it has a connection to God, it's not aware, self-aware of the connection to God. Does that make sense? Can you see the difference between being self-aware of something and actually having it? Like you can have something and not be aware of it at all. And in this condition, the soul is connected to God, but does not have an awareness of its own connection to God.
Yes.
Yep. And we'll go up to that.
So how do we then have that feeling, like I have often had that feeling of a loss of that connection?
That comes from your parents' emotional injuries regarding losses of connections in their own lifetime. All right. So, for example, let's say I'm a mother, and when I was 15, sorry, I'm a mother of your mother, right? But when I was 15, I had this really good boyfriend, right? That was just really amazing. But when I was 18, he just left. And then, because I just felt like I was still in love with him, but eventually, you know, I just sort of got over it, and I finished up marrying a man when I was 22. And then I had Paula. Can you see that Paula is going to have the emotion of terrible loss about one particular person inside of Paula? Because mum never released that loss.
Ahí no era la madre de la madre, sino que eso está ahí mal. Es simplemente la madre, no es la abuela ni nada.
Can you see that? And so Paula is going to feel that like a loss of someone special, like a loss of soulmate type emotion. She's going to feel that like that. And we often have that. And by the way, most people through their life have that with God as well. So this is why, you know, a lot of times we have these feelings that occur on the planet, particularly in societies where there's mainstream religion. So we're either in the Muslim societies or Christian societies and so forth, where there's mainstream religion. Most people who are born have this terrible sense of a loss of God, because the previous generation did the practice of their religion for many years, and then sort of many of them gave up on their being God, or gave up on this connection with God, which is this terrible sadness about a loss of God. And so we, as a child, will then have this deep sadness about losing God. Right? And that generation, that happens generationally, emotionally. It doesn't mean it's necessarily even in your parents. It could be in your grandparents and passed down and never released in your parents, for example. So this is where in the Paget messages there is a message, I think it was written by Luke, that talked about the multi-generational effects of sin, and it's worth having a read of, because every single thing that we have inside of us is based on something that was not healed in the previous generation, usually, including this thing about God.
So I'm just trying to figure out, when in processing that emotion, which has come up a number of times for me,
Yep.
the loss of connection with God.
Yeah, which came from Anon and Anan.
Yeah.
Can you see why?
That's, yeah. Yes. I can see why.
So the first human couple had this connection with God, and then through their choices lost it. And then it felt the effects of the pain of that loss. Can you see that? And that multi-generational emotional injury has been passed down ever since the beginning of their lives to now. And so every new generation is going to experience that same pain of that loss.
So is that a causal?
That's a causal emotion, yes. That is a causal emotion that you need to let yourself experience.
But it keeps coming back, so I obviously haven't got
to the cause of it. Exactly. Or that it might be just pretty big and you need to do a lot more crying about it. It's one of those two. Yeah. So you
just keep trying to go with what comes up.
Well, the key is to understand what it's about. See, a lot of times it's about the loss of God reliance and into self-reliance, which is what Ammon and Anan, the first human pair, got themselves into. And that emotional injury has been passed down from generation to generation to generation. So all of us feel like we have a bit of a hole when it comes to God. as a result of this emotion. See, if we didn't have that, we would be born without the feeling of having a hole when it comes to God, sort of thing. We'd have a desire for God because we'd recognize the existence of God much more easily than we do now with our emotional injuries. But we wouldn't have this terrible grief associated with it. Does that make sense? At the moment, many of us have got this terrible grief associated with it, which is related to this loss that they experience.
Thanks.
Makes sense? If you go up to Brian up the back, you see his hand up a fair bit. So.
Hey Joe, this is more about feeling left out again.
Yep. Can I just address this emotionally for you? Is that all right? Right. Now, as a gay man, what's happening is one of the big emotional injuries that you've had from your childhood in particular is this feeling that nobody really understands what it's like to be me. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yep. And because of that, when we talk about this separation of the soul, I'm feeling it, that it's immaterial whether male, female, two males, two female. That's how I feel it. You don't feel it that way. You feel it like, again, he's talking about male, female, women, men. No, not talking, there's the feeling inside of you is it's not being recognized as a gay male, right? The key is to go into that because there's a lot of multi-generational error on this planet about those emotions. And it's sad because that gets projected at you. So it's like a barrage. And this is something many of us who are heterosexual do not understand about homosexuality and being homosexual. Being homosexual, right from the time of your incarnation, there is this barrage of judgment coming from society to you. Right from the time of incarnation. It not only comes from your parents, your own parents, right? But it comes from society in general. And it comes from society in general in lots of different walks of life. It's not just like sexuality that's questioned. It's also religion that's questioned. In other words, homosexuals, what do most religions say? It's not godly. Right? God never created that way, so it's not godly. So therefore it's wrong. So there's that huge projection at any newly incarnated child who has this split of a male or a female split at the soul level. There's this huge projection coming from society and from their own parents right from the time of incarnation that not only affects their gender or their sexuality and their gender choices, but it also affects their religion, it affects their politics, it affects every single aspect of your life. So many of you don't see heterosexuality as an issue. The reason why is because you haven't had a whole lifetime of projections about heterosexuality coming at you. But for every single person who is a part of a gay or a homosexual soul, a soul male or female split, has had this projection from the moment of incarnation. You imagine how that feels. So that feels terrible. And there's a lot of grief to feel about that from a person who's gay. But there's also a lot to feel about it as heterosexuals.
Mucha pena, mucha aflicción, no dolor ahí, tal como lo ponemos siempre literal.
Why do we have this huge judgment that we continue to project? Right? What's going on inside of us that causes us to have these big projections? Because it's a terrible thing to have you imagine for a moment that you grow up, you're 15, 16 years of age, and heterosexuality is questioned and told and said to be ungodlike. How would you be feeling, do you think? Do you think it's an issue then for you? Of course it's an issue then for you. Can you see? So it's very, very important to understand how much damage has happened to every single person who is homosexual on the planet. by the people who are heterosexual on the planet. Right? Very important to understand that damage. And so, but my suggestion to yourself, Brian, is to allow yourself to grieve about that damage.
Yeah, I have done a fair bit since I talked to you last, and one of the things I seem to have become aware of is that I'm getting some from the spiritual realm as well.
Yeah, there's huge projection in the spiritual realm. You see, many spirits haven't yet released their viewpoints about sexuality. So many spirits in the first, second, and third spheres of the spirit world who are still religious have huge judgment. So if you're mediumistic and a homosexual, that even makes it more like you are, that makes it even...
Como él es lo que él dicen entre los dos ahí, que no está registrado. Si eres medium y homosexual, como yo soy, dice él, como tú eres.
More difficult, because you've got now these nasty, angry spirits projecting at you. You shouldn't be gay, what's wrong with you? You know, all these different projections you get from Earth, you get also from the spirit world. But because you're mediumistic, you can just feel it like it. But it's not like you can run away into your corner up at Mulaney and get away from that, because these are spirits that follow you from here to there to here to there and everywhere you go. And they are like these oppressive, you know, fundamentalists that are on Earth. They will keep barking and grabbing at you emotionally until you release the emotion of it. And when you release the emotion of it, that's when you won't feel it anymore. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. So if you can allow yourself to just address the emotion of that, that will help quite a lot. But also when you address the emotion of that, you'll find people around you, even heterosexuals around you, will start recognizing their role in the creation, their role in what they created in you. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So you have people who you don't even know who are heterosexual saying, boy, I just see how much damage I've projected at homosexual people all my life. And they'll start recognizing that. But they won't do that probably until you start releasing the grief that you've been starting to release about that. One of the things I must say to all of those of you who are mediumistic, and of course many of you are developing mediumistically quite well, is that spirit projections, once you have your mediumistic ability, are quite often more difficult to deal with than projections from people on Earth. And the reason why is that projections from people on Earth you can generally get away from in a physical environment, but projections from spirits are very, very difficult to avoid. The only way to get away from a projection from a spirit is to deal with the emotional reason in yourself as to why your soul is receiving it. Does that make sense? That's the only way you can deal with it. So like at the moment, I've got millions and millions and millions of spirits projecting at me all this stuff about me being Jesus, right? And the only way for me to deal with it is to feel my emotions about it. I can't protect myself from it. I can, you know, if I was on the natural love path, I'd surround myself with white light and do all those other things, you know, that people do. But on the divine love path, I shouldn't protect myself from it. I should just feel what it generates inside of myself, because once I release that, it'll have no effect on me. So you'll get to the point where someone's yelling and screaming at you and you'll have no effect at all. You won't feel like yelling and screaming back. You won't feel like hurting them. You'll just look at them maybe even a bit strangely and think, oh, okay, that's where it goes. You maybe even feel compassion for them because they have this fear that they're working their way through. But you won't feel like really angry and, you know, really upset about it. And while I'm on the subject, bearing that in mind, anytime you are attacked, if you want to respond in kind, or even if you want to defend yourself, you are avoiding an emotional injury. Does that make sense? So let yourself feel about what that emotional injury may be. It's now 3 o'clock, so that went fast. Time goes fast when you're having fun.
Dice que son las 3.
And maybe not for you, but it went fast for me anyway.
Y creo que dice que ahora toca ayuno. Creo que paran media hora. Y bromea con, bueno, no sé vosotros, pero...
We come back around 3:45, if we can make it about then. And we'll continue this discussion.
O sea, creo que hay una broma sobre Eso. Bueno, Clau, ¿tú cuánto te tienes que salir? ¿Que ir? No sé si estás doblemente metida aquí. Clau.
Está dos veces Clau.
A ver, tengo aquí una cosa. Está. Sí. Dice ahora mismo la dicho. Estás haciendo cosas por ahí, bueno, y pues ya está. Así acaba la historia esta. Hemos ido rapidillo, las frases son más largas en español que en...
Bellísimo. Es bellísima todo lo que hemos compartido.
Sí, ahí...
No.
Todo el...
¿No me escuchás, Iván?
Ahora.
Ahora te escuchamos.
Ahí está. Sí.
¿Qué pasaba antes?
No, yo salí hace rato, pero quedé sin datos en el teléfono aparentemente y en el cambio breve de una red a la otra, entonces me quedé detrás en el estudio, digamos.
Sí, y yo te he tenido que volver a incorporar y ahora apareces como duplicada. Entonces vamos a quitar una por curiosidad.
Dale. De paso vemos qué pasa.
Sigues ahí. Sí, es la última que metí. Muy bien. Así que ahora sois dos Claudias. Vale. Pues esto, sobre todo importante cómo hemos empezado con Natalia, creo que era el comienzo. No, el comienzo no. Cuando la niña le pasa a Natalie es, ¿verdad?
Ajá.
Natalie.
Sí, aquí está. Y la tiene la que debe ser la hija ahí. Y cuando Natalie llora, la hija, por las adicciones, tan pronto, ¿verdad? Que ya estamos programados para que la mamá no sienta la pena, ya la va a tapar las lágrimas. Nos ha dejado helados eso. Ya estamos confundidos con lo que es el amor ahí.
Sí. Sí, yo vi que señalaste con el cursor ahí.
Sí.
Sí, la mano.
Es increíble. Tan pequeña que es y, claro, las mamás nos crían como para eso, ¿no? Ay, no llores, no llores. Entonces los niños enseguida devuelven lo mismo a los padres, ¿no? Y de hecho en este año 2010 es el año, creo recordar, donde hace el taller sobre el tabú de la madre, que es el que tiene todo el mundo en el planeta, que tenemos ahí, que es difícil, por eso, relacionarnos con Dios y sanar las heridas en gran medida, porque realmente quien nos ha creado, somos un alma, si eso es verdad, si somos un alma, pues quien nos ha creado es Dios, no. Entonces, es tremenda esta parte, y Natalie, como siempre, está metiendo ahí cositas más profundas, ¿no? De la mediumnidad, que ellas están ahí. Ya en el 2009 han empezado con el taller, con las sesiones que iban a durar un año, ¿no? Que lo vimos en el primero de la ley de vinculación. Ya se han puesto más serios con eso. Bueno, entonces, Clau, te preguntaba antes qué pasaba con tu horario.
No, 13:30 planifiqué que me busquen.
No me acordaba.
Para estar tranquilo.
Vale, muy bien. Pues nada.
13:30 es...
Una hora menos tuya. Las 12:30.
Ok.
Sí.
Gracias.
¿Te molesta que hable duplicada, Iván? ¿Querés quitar un perfil?
No, sí, ya está quitado, ya está quitado.
No se oye duplicado.
Yo me sigo escuchando en eco.
Ah, qué raro. A ver. Voy a sacar esto por si acaso el eco que no tiene que ver con eso. Hola, Clau, ¿estás? ¿Sigues?
Hola.
Ah.
Hola.
¿Me oyes
¿Sí?
mejor?
Ahora sí, no retumba. No, porque quería contar que, bueno, para quienes nos oyen, bueno, que por ahí vamos identificando historias como Jenny Graham, que nos regalan mucho por ley de atracción. La resonancia es muy fuerte en muchos casos. Con Natalie también, no sé si Natalie en este caso cuando habla de su marido habla de este joven al que conozco más adelante. Yo conocí antes, pero más adelante en el año respecto de este video, donde también hablan de las adicciones que los vinculan, lo mismo con Jen y Graham, del 2016, los grupos, y que hemos visto, digamos, como, no sé, en este caso que habla, muy interesante justamente de por qué preguntaste lo que preguntaste. A mí me surge un montón de cuestiones al respecto, sí. Cómo uno busca, de alguna manera, como dice él, la duda, no sé, no registré no anoté la afirmación que hace Jesús, como que la duda contribuye a evitar.
Aquí
eso.
está la
Sí,
afirmación.
ahí está. Las dudas son una buena excusa para alejarnos de nuestras emociones. Entonces, me gustó mucho cuando él empezó, ¿por qué? Porque ella afirmaba estar segura y termina reconociendo que no es así, ¿no? Claro, por eso pregunta. Y siento que estoy así, como en este lugar, ¿no?
Claro, y fíjate qué bueno el tener el alma ya ahí abierta con las heridas quizá más controladillas y además la conexión con los guías espirituales, porque entonces les preguntaba, o sea, como preguntando a Dios, por así decir, entonces los guías espirituales ayudan ahí a que oigamos la verdad o a que nos conectemos con ella, no sabemos cómo va, ¿no? Porque también está la conciencia en el alma como órgano de verdad directa de parte de Dios. Claro, les pregunta a los guías por qué dudaba y dijeron que era porque no me sentía merecedora, claro, del amor de una persona. Y es cuando se emociona y la niña le va a intentar consolar, que es en realidad la niña ahí está siendo egoísta, que normalmente en el mundo diríamos, qué buena es esa niña, cómo quiere a su mamá. Y precisamente la definición de egoísmo es que utilizar a los demás para tapar o ayudar a los demás a tapar sus propias, o suprimir o reprimir sus propias emociones y por lo tanto las heridas y así no pueden crecer en el alma. Vale, pues genial. No se permite ser abierta. Si es verdad lo que decías, yo creo que es en el 2016 que la vemos. Claro que tampoco sabemos, lo mismo ella también es muy joven y no lo parece tanto como...
Claro, sí, analizan la lógica que los vincula y se ve perfectamente el encastre que ofrece este trueque que hacemos en general con todas las adicciones, incluso, bueno, con el hijo, porque la hija reacciona así porque en algún momento justamente ese error es tomado como verdad en su alma de que es lo que debe hacer frente a una situación, o sea que estamos todo el tiempo como que favoreciendo, digamos, esto, cultivando de alguna manera las adicciones. Y claro, ella ya recibió como ese mandato, es lo que debe hacer una hija buena y a su vez, bueno, proyectará así con las relaciones.
Sí, pero fíjate que
los
no
amigos,
es ni siquiera, que no tiene por qué ser un mandato, que simplemente es, si a ti desde pequeña, pongamos el caso, siempre te han hecho lo mismo, de, ay, cada vez que lloras, intentar que no llores, ay, ¿qué le pasa? Pobrecita, pobrecita. Eso ya es ese es el mandato, no hace falta que haya una orden.
Claro, sí. A eso me refería, claro, como una instrucción, sí.
Sí.
Una práctica.
Eso. Sí, eso
que
se
se
hace
incorpora.
un hábito.
Exactamente. Y es como debe ser, más si sos buena, entre comillas. Ujú.
Y claro, es una adicción entre hijos y padres creada muy fuerte, muy temprano. Y es muy difícil luego de... Ya vimos al Andrew, la entrevista que tuvo tan dramática, 15 días o así, 10 días antes de morir, de cáncer, entre comillas, o sea, de las emociones que tenía desde muy pequeño sobre las exigencias autoimpuestas y puestas por la madre, los padres, todo esto, ¿no? Las proyecciones hacia las mujeres, en su caso es lo que le mataba, el cáncer, proyecciones para no sentir la herida con la madre, que era una herida de eso típico, ¿no?
Y que incluso era de los espíritus que habían, a los que le había cedido la voluntad. Tengo entendido, ¿no? Hasta ese punto.
Sí, que sé, luego se metieron espíritus.
Ajá.
Y después, sí, bueno, en ese caso ya estaba la mujer como espíritu, la que había muerto. Sí, se metió...
Bueno, en esa secuencia se ve perfecto como la busca, la encuentra, o sea, todo lo que está explicando un poco Jesús acá, desde las heridas, el no procesamiento te lleva por ley justamente a traer desde lo que temes y bueno, el encastre perfecto. Distorsiona completamente la experiencia amorosa, entre comillas.
Sí, desde muy pronto la definición contraria en realidad a lo que sería amor según lo ve Dios. Entonces, para no monopolizar mucho, Ana, ¿estás ahí viva?
Dale.
Sí estoy, Iván.
Por lo menos aún estás viva.
Claro.
Después de esta paliza que nos han dado de...
Qué maravilla, yo estoy fascinada. Me gustó mucho también cuando los que se sientan al frente, uno de esos señores que habló del libre albedrío, pero no somos conscientes cuando estamos en el momento de la concepción.
Sí, pero fíjate eso, ¿no? Eso está claro, ¿no? Ha quedado claro. Qué simple es, pero qué profundo, como siempre. Que el alma está ahí con todos los regalos ya dados, pero no puede tenerlos, no puede hacer uso. Claro, es como si le regalas a un niño pequeño de 1 año, le regalas un ordenador, ¿no?
Un teléfono, exacto.
Un teléfono.
Tal cual.
O algo así, sí, esa sería una analogía.
Y yo, o sea, eso me aclaró mucho, porque fíjate tú, tienes todo ese regalo, pero solo en el caso de Jesús, en su primera encarnación, él no tenía heridas, pero todos los demás no están, incluso él en este momento, bueno, ya estará en unión con Dios. Tenemos que trabajar con nuestras heridas constantemente.
Sí.
Y como los espíritus tienen que seguir trabajando con sus heridas. Hasta la 7ª fue que dijo, en la 8ª ya no tienes heridas.
Sí. La 7ª es raro, la 7ª es como que ya es profundizar la relación con Dios, hacerla completamente el centro, y como eso es una herida también la que hay con Dios, pues sí, es terminar. Claro, hasta la 7ª es como si estuviéramos usando a Dios. Si estás en el camino del amor divino, es como si estuvieras usando a Dios para ir rápidamente sanando las heridas. Pero en la 7ª ya no es como que el foco ya no está en sanarte tú, sino literalmente en abrirte ya a lo que es la relación total que se da en la 8, algo así, ¿no? ¿Cómo lo diríais?
Es así, Iván. Es así.
porque te acuerdas, ¿no? De los vídeos de Sebastián, no, Sebastián, ¿no? Es el que pasaba.
Sí,
que lo ha
Sebastián.
Sí, él es el del amor natural, que estaba en la sexta, ¿no?
Sí, el ateo.
El ateo, es cierto. Sí, pero me gustó muchísimo. Y cómo, o sea, no es fácil lo del alma gemela por todas estas heridas. Entonces podemos decir, no me gusta, pero realmente tiene que ver por tus heridas que empezamos a etiquetar.
Sí. Oye, ya que tenemos un poco de rato, si queréis hago un esbozo del tema que os digo, que en mi caso añade lo de las creencias en la reencarnación. ¿Os acordáis que he hablado Miller ha estado hablando de cómo los espíritus te emparejan con otras almas y ha pintado ahí una almita, una femenina, y aquí los espíritus actuando sobre la gente para emparejarnos en base a nuestros deseos, que se basan en no querer sentir nuestras heridas. Nos pueden meter energías a través de esas heridas, a través del aura que está como rota, nos meten energías para emparejarnos. ¿Y os acordáis de ese caso que he hablado, que era una chica que había vivido en un campo de concentración?
La Segunda Guerra Mundial.
Y el otro era un guardia, y entonces, fíjate, claro, ese era un espíritu, otro espíritu, y Miller ha dicho, claro, están en diferentes localizaciones, a lo mejor les es más difícil relacionarse, y para relacionarse tienen que pasar por ir a la Tierra otra vez, o sea, seguir enlazados a la Tierra e intentar buscar gente que con sus heridas les permita tener esa relación ilusoria, digamos, entre estos espíritus, pero a través de personas en la Tierra. Pues es que eso mismo es lo que me pasó en el 2020, al parecer. Porque, y todo depende de que nos creíamos, algunas de las personas teníamos la creencia en la reencarnación. Y eso también fue usado. Y además también se me conectó en mi caso con luces en el cielo después de unos meses, cuando ya estaba, o de unas semanas, cuando ya estaba yo en relación con esta chica. Resulta que fue apoyado eso porque de repente vimos alguna cosa, no sé qué, nos echaron de hecho un flash. O sea, en realidad da miedo, porque si son espíritus y aliados todos. Bueno, y la historia es como muy novelera, porque es como tiene muchos detalles muy graciosos, porque es eso, es como de repente en un chat que estamos haciendo en WhatsApp, un grupo, hay una de las personas, que no era ni ella ni yo, de repente le viene una imagen de otra vida, y entonces él se ve como siendo un abad en un monasterio, un abad que es maltratador, y entonces yo le digo que a mí hace unos años una terapeuta me había visto lo que podría ser una vida, y ahora sé que es un espíritu, ¿no? Pero una vida pasada, pero no es una vida pasada, sino un espíritu. Una terapeuta hacía años atrás me había visto una especie de monje que estaba reprimido por un abad. Y entonces, fíjate qué mala leche, entre comillas, los espíritus a él le muestran esa imagen, y entonces yo recuerdo eso. Y entonces los espíritus también que estaban asociados a las otras personas del chat, también empiezan a recibir impresiones y cosas, algunas personas, y esta persona central que recuerda todo, recuerda el meollo, esa persona le empieza a servir otras imágenes, el espíritu, para que vaya conectando más cosas. Entonces, bueno, es muy complejo. Entonces, quiero hacer a lo mejor un vídeo, a lo mejor yo solo, porque es súper complejo y es como una novela, porque esto se retrotrae a que yo a esa persona la invité a ese grupo debido a que años antes yo había conocido solo por internet a su tía, que resulta que a su madre, que a la abuela de la que luego va a ser mi pareja por un poco tiempo, a la abuela le había puesto mis audios y entonces, bueno, es un novelón. Y entonces en los audios que yo pongo ahí, es lo de conversaciones con Dios, creen en la reencarnación. En ese libro transmite esa creencia falsa. Entonces yo creo que fue influencia de emparejar a esa abuela, influenció en su nieta, que es muy influenciable, porque también esa abuela tenía como deseos de haber tenido un marido más espiritual y cosas así. Entonces, fijaros el novelón que se monta. Y luego si le añadís lo de las luces, lo de más cosas que luego vivimos, que comprueban, luego la conexión energética, que es como tal como lo ha dicho alguna participante en este taller, que son conexiones muy fuertes que te dices, hostias, ¿esto qué pasa aquí? Pues será algo como tipo alma gemela, algo de eso, porque no puede ser que haya esta sincronización de sentir algo tan fuerte sin verse las caras, sentir cosas muy fuertes que parecen ser el uno por el otro y cosas así, pero brutal. O sea, bueno, eso habría que tener mucha más tranquilidad y tiempo, porque es que es como muy romántico de película, pero de los espíritus. Claro, ahora vemos que es muy tenebroso también, por un lado. ¿Me perdonáis el largo relato?
No, está muy bueno porque fíjate lo que explica de que en el mundo espiritual tienen vamos a decir, esa adicción y no saben cómo vivirlo y se conectan con alguien acá, ¿no? Es lo que entiendo.
Sí.
Sí, perfecto, Iván.
Sí, en mi caso habría sido una monja quizás muy abusada por ese abad, que estaría conectada o habría conectado para la ocasión en ese momento, por el interés de la abuela de ella, que ya había muerto, pero hace pocos años solamente, y que me habría escuchado a mí, que ya me tendría a lo mejor en el foco, porque le encantaron mis audios, no sé qué, y que se los ponía lo que es la tía de esta expareja, por así llamarla mía, ¿no? Entonces, bueno, en ese lío, por eso te digo que es muy... O sea, que es una pena. Y por un lado, el gran meollo de esto es la ley de compensación. Es decir, yo por ayudar a distribuir falsedades, estoy facilitando que los espíritus utilicen la creencia falsa que yo seguía teniendo y a los demás. O sea, estoy aumentando el lío y facilitando ver la falsedad de eso mediante los espíritus, usando todo eso, pero a lo bestia ya. Es decir, usando mis heridas y las de otras personas para conectar y creer que somos destinados así unos para otros. Y, o sea, y todo, y claro, el meollo de esto es que es como un gran ejemplo sobre ley de compensación. Para mí ha sido un gran ejemplo sobre eso, esa ley actuando en un caso donde podrías decir, qué bonito. Y no, se trata de espíritus del camino del amor natural, donde en realidad es todo uso de las auras rotas, que ya están rotas, no para que se recompongan y crezcamos en el alma, sino para meter energías bonitas en función de estos fines, estas motivaciones, que pueden ser de espíritus más oscuros, como los que veíamos aquí en lo de Miller hoy, o sea, en lo que nos ha contado de la italiano del campo de concentración,
de guardia.
De primera esfera, o pueden ser de esferas más elevadas, o puede ser que estos de primera esfera accedan a ser guiados, pero por guías solo del amor natural, que a lo mejor están en el segundo plano y pueden manejar las luces, por ejemplo, pueden proyectar lo que parecen naves o cosas así, porque a nosotros nos proyectaron de madrugada un flash del cielo que no hace daño a los ojos, directo, boom, cuando estábamos por el campo. Y, o sea, que es una cosa rarísima, o sea, un flash que va enfocadísimo desde un sitio que parece que está a tomar por saco, que es una luz que dices, eso no es un avión, claro, pero solamente es una luz. Entonces esos espíritus, fijaros, de la segunda pueden ayudar por lo que sea, ya que son guías, se autodeclaran guías del camino del amor natural de estos espíritus que están en la primera y les ayudan en base a las creencias en la reencarnación, a mis heridas, mi ley de compensación. Y entonces fíjate el lío que se monta, que por otra parte es un lío para ver, que nos sirve para ver tanto las heridas, tanto la falsedad, y como hemos visto siempre, que la influencia de espíritus en realidad pues es también eso. Bueno,
muy bueno, Iván. Está bueno. Porque va a servir para que otra gente no esté creyendo en cuestiones de ovnis y de ese tema de extraterrestre.
Claro, no, sí, o sea, porque extraterrestres, el problema es que está confundido, o sea, a ver, Miller, una cosa es que haya extraterrestres y otra cosa es que visiten aquí, porque aquí ya tenemos suficientes espíritus, o sea, aquí ya hay muchísima gente que ya no tiene cuerpo físico, pero que puede proyectárselo, muchísimos planos superpoderosos, ya no digamos los celestiales, que antes de que venga un extraterrestre que realmente haya nacido en otra tierra con sus propios planos espirituales y su aventura para crear los planos celestiales, eso es otro mundo por completo diferente, aunque a lo mejor no está muy lejos, pero espiritualmente eso está muy lejos, porque aquí nosotros tenemos miles y miles de millones de espíritus con poder para proyectarse, o por lo menos para tocar algunas lucecitas por aquí y por allá, a lo mejor desde la segunda dimensión. O sea que por eso el problema de creer en extraterrestres, que es una simplificación que distorsiona el mundo espiritual por completo.
Bueno.
Sí.
Sí, ese es un tema.
Yo siento también.
Ajá, sigue, Clau.
Clau, sí.
No, quería decir que cuando le responde a este señor, ahora se me perdió el momento, que le dice que es importante justamente estar relacionado con los cambios en la Tierra, y cuando le responde que pensando un poco panorámicamente, Iván, de como dice Ana, de echar luz sobre esto, sobre estas cuestiones que están sucediendo, sobre todo en las transacciones, imagino yo, que favorecen o en las que estamos participando, como decís vos, contribuyendo al daño en nuestra alma y a otros, y con el no saber, o sea, esta ignorancia nos habilita, justamente contribuye, favorece mucho este desconocimiento y estas pseudo verdades que circulan, porque realmente un poco como lo que se dice constantemente en la vida divina, ¿no? Asumir tus emociones y hacerte cargo es la clave para todo, en realidad, y reconocer todo lo que está sucediendo en ese acto de irresponsabilidad que tenemos con nosotros mismos, básicamente como principio general, digamos, con esa desintonización y todo lo que acarrea. Por ahí parece muy complejo, pero como en un momento dicen, es muy simple y también es así, digamos, tiene esa connotación.
Me gustaría que hiciéramos un día media hora de ver los detalles, porque creo que ahora me está viniendo que a través de quizás a través de la interacción que he tenido con esos espíritus, a través de mi expareja, de pocos meses, es quizá un espíritu que quizás se podía dar en mi caso, que solo, aparte de los otros espíritus guías o lo que sea, que donde el único momento en que he sido realmente querido con un amor algo puro en el planeta es por un espíritu, a través de los ojos porque yo me acuerdo de una mirada, o sea, de donde yo sentí, o sea, realmente eso, o sea, una cosa muy pura, pero me parece que puede ser del espíritu en realidad, que podría ser la abuela. Entonces se podría ver esa cosa rara, en mi caso, que bueno, él lo dice, Jesús, y lo vamos a ver otra vez.
Sí.
En este taller, creo, no sé si lo hemos visto ya, que dice, nadie ha sido querido, realmente aquí casi nadie ha experimentado amor, y creo que es en las siguientes 2 horas, donde lo pone con todas las letras otra vez. Y yo creo que en mi caso podría darse esta cosa tan rara de que espíritus de otra dimensión y de la primera han ayudado mediante mis creencias falsas a que por lo menos una espíritu bien intencionada, pero perdida igual que todos, fuera del camino del amor divino, que solo llevamos poco tiempo, pues en el camino del amor natural haya sido lo más puro que haya yo podido experimentar en mi caso concreto. Entonces, por eso es como muy, muy ilustrativo. Entonces, ¿qué ibas a decir? Perdón.
No, para nada. Yo justamente te decía, si podemos, que bueno, uno como que quiere controlar todo, ¿no? Pero estamos en 1 hora 50 de grabación, pero si podemos como enmarcar, sí, lo que haríamos que, bueno, el oyente necesitaría por ahí conocer estos 2 videos, el recorrido que hicimos, pero es sumamente interesante para mí despejarlo y ponerlo así, como traer todos los elementos en un espacio, hacer los dibujos, porque realmente hemos, como ya lo dije en un momento, hemos conectado con muchas de nuestras, así sea intuitivamente, con muchas de nuestras heridas, digo intuitivamente como intelectualmente, porque no las he procesado en mi caso profundamente, pero el resonar es sumamente como elocuente, digamos, cuando escuchás, y cómo eso a mí me ha servido tanto, ya digo, con el caso de Graham, de Natalie, de muchos de los casos, incluso de Jesús y María, que comparten su experiencia y que echa luz con ese propósito, ¿no? Básicamente, hacer un video para poder relatar esta experiencia.
Claro, que yo lo asocio también a que no se me olvide, si lo hacemos ese video, lo asocio a que como yo ya llevaba tiempo, entre comillas, sirviendo a los espíritus del camino del amor natural, que si con los cursos que había traducido, no sé cuándo, en ese momento estaba con lo de Magenta Pixie, no sé qué. Entonces esos espíritus, por ley, aunque estén solo en camino del amor natural, tienen que devolver cosas. Es un toma y daca. Entonces yo antes de conocer a esta chica, yo había visto luces ya en el cielo, porque en el 2020 mucha gente las vio además. Yo creo que, o sea, y entonces ya dije, Tate, ya está, aquí esto, extraterrestres, porque yo no tenía tanta cosa con lo de las dimensiones, sí que sabía que había dimensiones, pero uno no diferencia tan claramente que, claro, no, los extraterrestres que no tienen cuerpo físico, en realidad no son extraterrestres, la mayoría de ellos, o todos, bueno, en principio todos, como por lo que he dicho antes, son todos nacidos aquí. Entonces, pueden ser abortos o abortos espontáneos. Entonces, yo ya había visto luces y fue muy bonito, o sea, que estaba todo preparado. Por eso es una cosa que está muy bien presentarla poco a poco por lo que tú dices, porque resonamos con la posibilidad y vemos desde otra manera lo que es el camino del amor natural, el camino del amor divino, las trampas que no son trampas, porque es por ley, pero sí son porque están usando las heridas y no lo saben. No, simplemente con buena intención te dan la energía, porque hay 2 maneras grandes, diferentes por totalmente de usar las energías, y es eso, queriendo que la gente sane el aura o usando el aura ya rota para meter las energías. Son completamente diferentes, pero pueden sentirse cosas muy parecidas. De hecho, en el caso, Jesús le ha dicho, o le han dicho a la participante, oye, que le metes, sí, le he dicho a Jesús, te mete sentimientos muy parecidos a lo que antes ha dicho Alex. Y es que en el primer vídeo, Ana, que tú no estabas, que no sé si has visto, Alex cuenta lo más bonito quizá de todo lo que llevamos del taller, que es la experiencia de conexión con su alma gemela que tenía delante. Y entonces le dice, claro, es que esos espíritus te meten cosas parecidas a eso. No sabemos cómo, pero así sabemos que a través de las heridas del aura, pero no sabemos cómo harán para que se simule eso tanto, la conexión. Y tiene que ver con los enamoramientos, que también son eso. Bueno, Clau, tú ya llega la hora, ya vamos a cerrar también, que yo llevo también muchísimo. Entonces...
Bueno, dejamos ese pendiente y lo hacemos así, en un recorte, está bueno, a mí me gusta.
Sí.
la idea.
Bueno,
Muy
pues,
buena.
entonces, ¿quieres despedirte, Ana, tú también, de alguna manera, de tu amado público?
Bueno, cada oportunidad que se nos brinda de compartir estos videos, este material, una maravillosa luz, o sea, darse cuenta dónde está tu evasión, ¿qué es eso? O sea,
Sí.
yo por lo menos quedo retratada, la evasión, mi
Bueno,
evasión.
hay que estar todo el rato, ¿verdad? Pues rezando por pedir por qué dudamos, como ha dicho Natalie, por qué tal, y no tenemos fe en esos rezos y en pedir amor de Dios, que es lo principal. Sí, y esto es para lo que tiene que servir, sí. Entonces, y tú, Clau, ¿quieres despedirte también del amado público, que ya te tienes que ir también?
Sí, también así como un poco dice Ana, es una bendición. Por ley de atracción compartimos estos momentos. Así que bueno, eso, sobre todo, aunque haya todavía poca fe, entre comillas, la seguimos alimentando, pues yo confío que en esto justamente, en habernos encontrado, en los temas que estamos hablando, como que sí tiene ese diseño, parte del diseño, digamos. Así que sí.
Bueno,
gracias,
pues,
muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias.
Un
Voy
regalo.
a cerrar la transmisión, la cierro, gracias, y ahora pues ya nos despedimos ya de todo.